If you haven't already joined our community Discord server, it's made up of subscribers from my channel, Fishy, Dynamite, and Long-Eared Fox. The link to that is in the description. Go ahead and join it. We're getting new people every day. We have channels to talk about Red Dead Redemption 2 and a spoiler channel for Red Dead Redemption 2, as well as general chats for all kinds of different things. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and click that link in the description and join the server. Thanks. Okay. Let's get on with it. Quick warning before we begin, this video contains full and complete spoilers for Red Dead Redemption 2. Do not try and chance it, just leave the video now if you haven't completed all 6 chapters and the 2 epilogue chapters of the Red Dead Redemption 2 main story. As this video is analysing and talking about how Red Dead Redemption 2 nails being a prequel, I have to talk about primarily the narrative, therefore I must delve into spoilers. A warning for anyone who hasn't played Red Dead Redemption 2, go finish the main story, then come back and watch this. Red Dead Redemption 2 is unequivocally one of the greatest games ever made. Whether it's your #1 spot is a matter of opinion that varies from person to person, but I think we can all agree that this game is an absolute masterpiece, not dissimilar from its predecessor Red Dead Redemption, of which I made a deep retrospective on earlier this year that took months of work, so if you want to check that out, I'll link it below and on a card at the top right of your screen. Red Dead Redemption 2 works as a prequel to Red Dead Redemption released in 2010, and going into this game we knew it would be set with the Van der Linde gang, and we knew we'd see John Marston again, younger however, and we knew this would be telling the story of the final days of that gang, but we didn't know exactly to what extent they'd do this. Rockstar have been known for the likes of Grand Theft Auto, in which they tell a new blockbuster story each time with new characters and a new arc, not tied to the last. But with Red Dead Redemption 2, this was not just set in the same universe, but was a direct story prequel to the first game. Therefore, there were certain expectations I felt had to be done in order to fully create the best experience from a prequel to one of my favourite all-time stories. After finishing the game, I have to say it's almost like Rockstar went inside my head and pulled out exactly what I thought this game needed and far, far more. In terms of narrative alone, this game is absolutely perfect, if not more so in its design, structure, writing, and approach. And I want to give the biggest thank you possible to the team behind it. You made me incredibly happy with how you tackled this game, and you should be immensely proud. Now, it's time to jump in and take a look at exactly how they achieved this level of success with Red Dead Redemption 2 and its narrative. First things first, Rockstar marketed this game from the get-go as being about Arthur Morgan, a new character before never mentioned in Red Dead Redemption 1. This had a lot of fans, myself included, very confused. Why are they not returning to John? He's right there, why aren't we playing as him? But it became clear over the course of the game why they made this creative decision, and it wasn't just for the sake of it. It was incredibly important to the plot and particular character developments over the course of the game. They begin this game by introducing their new character of Arthur Morgan. They show him as a cold, unremorseful gang member, Dutch's right-hand man. He's been in the gang since the very beginning, and he truly understands the ideals of the gang and completely lives by them. This is one of the main reasons we see him be so very loyal to Dutch until the end of the game. It's important to his character arc that we see him as this character who is never leaving the gang, and doesn't even want to for that matter. Arthur's whole life has been the gang, and he knows he won't ever be able to leave. This is his life, and he doesn't even seem to care about that for a majority of the game. It's important to note that Arthur Morgan is 36 years old, just 2 years younger than John was in the original Red Dead Redemption. Arthur at the start of the game is almost a mirror image of what John might have been had he stayed with the gang, and this is important for later on. Arthur's morality and focus, however, shifts as the game goes on, as more main events start to happen. The ferry job at the start of the game and hearing what Dutch did to that poor girl started to sow the seeds of doubt in everyone's mind, Arthur included. Later on, the events with the Greys and Braithwaites and losing Sean and then having Jack kidnapped after Dutch ensured them he had a plan caused everyone again to have cause for concern. Finding and murdering Angelo Bronte as some sort of twisted revenge also rubbed Arthur the wrong way too. The death of Hosea and Lenny, along with Dutch leaving John to be arrested and then refusing to help him out of jail, along with all the time Dutch slowly losing his mind, caused Arthur to see something was heavily wrong. Couple that with Arthur finding out he had tuberculosis after assaulting a man for money he owed the gang, gave Arthur perspective. He realized the gang was no longer what he thought it was, and maybe never was that from the beginning. They believed they had some kind of morality, stealing from people too rich to care and giving to people less fortunate, surviving on their own, but Arthur soon began to realise that Dutch was only using them for his own gain and didn't seem to give much care to people in the gang. With all of this set up, Rockstar could now allow Arthur to have the perfect redemption arc in which he tries his very best to hold the gang together and to save Dutch, a man he looked up to and trusted with every fibre of his being, and seeing him be twisted and manipulated and turn his back on his brothers hurt Arthur deeply, and you can see him show this with his frustration. He questions Dutch at every turn towards the end of chapter 6, and he feels it's his responsibility to keep everyone safe, because Dutch just doesn't want to listen. Arthur becomes more understanding and more caring and sees that the individual people are more important than the ideals of the gang that seems to have died long ago. Arthur's redemption arc is finally completed when we see him desperately trying to help John, Abigail and Jack leave the gang and live the life he wished he could have had. Knowing his end is near, he spends time reflecting on Mary and the life he deep down wishes he had the strength to take, instead of following Dutch for so many more years, and his dying wish is to see John happy with his family. As the player, this is incredibly satisfying for us because Arthur's redemption arc is what leads to John's redemption arc, intrinsically linking the two characters in one big narrative arc. What Arthur does shapes John, and both have their redemption stories because of Arthur Morgan's actions, and so after everything Arthur's experienced and went through, after all of his mistakes, he tries his best to make it right. He redeems himself and goes out a hero, fighting to protect his brother in giving him the life he never could, and that's a better way to go than Arthur ever could have predicted for himself. Arthur Morgan is an incredibly important character to Red Dead Redemption, and although he's never mentioned in the original game, his essence runs through the entire narrative and shapes John's actions entirely over the course of that game. Moving backwards slightly now, I feel it's important to talk about Dutch. Seeing his shift over the course of the game was a huge plot point and one that helped to shape the feud we see towards the very end. Characters like Sadie, John, Arthur and Charles see through what Dutch is doing. They realise the gang is not what it was meant to be and form a sort of alliance within the gang itself. Then you have characters like Bill Williamson, Javier Escuela and Micah who stand with Dutch, either following him blindly because they don't know what else to do, or encouraging Dutch's actions, slowly pushing him further and further away from John and Arthur, and further from sanity. Dutch's descent into madness is something we all knew would happen in this game, but I didn't think it would be handled so well. You can even understand why Dutch is doing what he's doing. Perhaps it could be out of genuine care for the gang, or perhaps fear of dying or going to jail. Whatever the reason is, we see him slowly begin to tear the gang apart. As more and more people fall, Dutch begins more and more to take brash decisions, which cost people their lives if it means he'll get what he wants. This is a core pillar of the Red Dead Redemption 2 narrative, which shapes the outcome of major characters, and it was done incredibly well. Another key element of Dutch's downfall, as well as shaping the decisions of characters like Arthur and John, is the character of Micah. Now, I don't know about you, but I hated Micah from the very start of the game, and clearly for good reason. This character began to really piss me off around chapter 6, where he practically replaces Arthur at Dutch's side and is continuously fueling Dutch's terrible decisions and causing total chaos for his own gain. Not to mention finding out Micah was the one who spoke to the Pinkerton agents, and he was clearly the one that tore the gang apart. If Dutch still wanted to trust Micah after finding that out, it was practically the final straw for Arthur. Even after Dutch left John in prison, even after Dutch left Arthur to die and Arthur thought John was dead, Arthur still wanted to confront Dutch to see if he could see reason, and that's the point where we realise Dutch is truly gone, and he'll never be able to see reason. All he'll ever do is fight for himself. At this point in the narrative, the gang falls apart entirely, as it has been since around the midpoint of the game. Dutch fully turns on Arthur and John, ultimately leading to Arthur's death. Now, the important part of all this, and the clear link to Red Dead Redemption 1, is when John meets Dutch on top of the mountain after confronting Micah. Dutch eventually kills Micah and doesn't say much, but I personally believe he regrets his actions. But at the same time, he believes he has to continue fighting because that's all he can do. And that line of thought mirrors pretty much what Dutch says to John at the end of Red Dead Redemption 1. He says he understands now that their time has passed, yet he can't stop fighting because that's all he knows. That's his nature, and you can really see that manifest in Red Dead Redemption 2. I think for Dutch, he doesn't change, it's the world around him which changes, making it more difficult for him to be in control with nature and the world, and making him fight harder, which in turn allows the gang to see his true self, and in the end breaks the gang apart. And this is a clear element in defining who John Marston will be moving forward, as it's done with such subtlety and elegance. The next pivotal step in writing this prequel was developing a good relationship between John Marston and Arthur Morgan. At the beginning of the game, Arthur doesn't like John. He has a lot of problems with him, telling people he's dumb, saying he's not a fighter, and that John abandoned the gang for a year before coming back, and he wasn't too pleased that he was welcomed back with open arms. There, however, are a few things that change this and allow their relationship to grow. For one, the new perspective of Arthur after realizing he's going to die allows him to see John differently. He knows himself how much he wishes he could have been with Mary and feels that John should get to live that life with his family. He begins to sympathize with all of the characters, but most of all John, because he's almost a parallel of himself. And in Arthur's final days, he wants to do for John what he couldn't do for himself, and that makes Arthur a very important character to John and his development. Another way they grow closer to one another is after Hosea dies. Dutch begins to lose his mind more and more, and Arthur becomes more of a brother to John than Dutch ever was a father. Arthur goes out of his way multiple times to help John when he's in prison, when Dutch won't rescue him, helping save Abigail from the Pinkertons, and finally standing with John against Dutch and helping him escape. Their relationship is key to John's character development over the course of Red Dead Redemption 2 and what he would be in Red Dead Redemption 1. I see John Marston's story as the main story of the Red Dead Redemption franchise, and clearly Rockstar understand that too. With John's development being at the forefront of this game and Arthur's arc directly affecting that of John, John's story is the story of Red Dead Redemption as a franchise, and we had to play as Arthur in this game to effectively tell this part of John's story. But I've already explained prior how important Arthur is to that of John Marston's story. Let's actually talk about John. John Marston at the start of this game is still rather naive. He's not the hardened outlaw type we know from Red Dead Redemption, and that's good. If he were the same character his entire life, that would be dull and poor writing. John's development comes from that of what he was to begin with. John is constantly trying to be two people. He doesn't know how to handle being a father, and he doesn't know what Abigail is to him. All he's ever known is the gang, and so he clings onto that. He says he's a father, yet he doesn't act like it, and Arthur makes this known a few times throughout the game, telling John to stop being two people, just be one of them. Arthur had this same issue and is speaking from experience. Arthur had to choose between Mary and the gang, and he chose the gang. Later on, however, he'd help John to do the opposite, which again links their characters intrinsically. The same way Arthur gains perspective over the course of the game, John does too. Perspective of the gang not being what it was, perspective of Dutch being in the wrong, a perspective that he loves his family deeply. He just finds it incredibly hard to voice it. It's a common thing with John Marston. We see it multiple times in the original Red Dead Redemption, not being able to articulate his feelings or talk about his past properly, and that's the same here but with his family. Once Jack is kidnapped, we see John switch instantly from caring about the gang to caring more about getting Jack back than anything in the world. This is John's true nature, and like Dutch says, you can't fight your true nature. John over the course of the game shows time and time again that he cares for his family, and cares for Jack especially. This begins to become more prominent the more time he spends with Arthur and opens up. By having John grow with Arthur, it not only opens up his perspective on what's going on with the gang, but it allows him to be far more confident in himself, in his emotions, and wear them on his sleeve rather than hiding them deep down. Arthur molds John over time into a far better man, and you start seeing this heavily in the epilogue stages of the game. By having us play as John in the epilogue, which is just over 25% of the main story in length, it shows that Rockstar understands perfectly that John Marston is the main character of Red Dead Redemption as a franchise. That all of this storytelling for Arthur and the gang and John is important for the overall Red Dead Redemption story, which is that of John Marston. Although we experience a majority of it from the point of view of Arthur Morgan, that's merely so we can see all sides of John's world, allowing us to see it from the inside of the gang, allowing us to see John from an outside perspective. It allows us to see how Arthur is important to John, and it allows us to witness all of it from an unbiased viewpoint looking in as Arthur Morgan. The epilogue is really the stage that shows this is truly a prequel to Red Dead Redemption in every single sense of the word, and you can start to see here very, very clearly that John Marston is practically the one from the original game, and he was heavily influenced by that of Arthur Morgan. After spending so much time with him, after reading his journal and living by what Arthur taught him, the epilogue shows that John cares about being a better man, and that's what he believes Arthur was. And he always wants to desperately live his life the way Arthur wanted him to, by marrying Abigail, by raising his son, and by living a decent life. And you can see throughout the epilogue and throughout Red Dead Redemption 1, John clings onto this notion, and that's all influenced by Arthur. The final 25% of Red Dead Redemption 2 showed me that Rockstar cares deeply about this narrative. It wasn't just a cheap prequel so they can make another Wild West game with a new character. This was made for a very important story reason, and it adds far more depth to the original game. Getting to see iconic moments such as the building of Beecher's Hope, Marston donning his iconic cowboy attire, and proposing to Abigail all brought a tear to my eye for far different reasons. This was like a love letter to fans the way it was presented, and every moment spent with John felt meaningful and like there was purpose to it. Beyond these iconic moments in the epilogue, we had some iconography that was incredibly well placed. For a start, his outfit is iconic, and having him wear that was absolutely brilliant. Another moment was in the barn when John first picks back up his weapons to help out at Pronghorn Ranch. We get an iconic shot of John holding the double-barreled shotgun, just like the front cover of Red Dead Redemption, again sending the message that Rockstar gives a shit. Not to mention the music shifting in the epilogue to use iconic melodies from the soundtrack of Red Dead Redemption 1, and on top of that entirely changing the Deadeye sound effect to be the one from the original game instead of the one from Red Dead Redemption 2. All of these things together make up what was a perfect showcase that this game is a prequel in every single sense of the word, and Rockstar did an incredible job. Another huge link is that Micah is essentially the catalyst for everything, for the gang falling apart and for John's mission for the government in the original game. Because Micah was dead, Edgar Ross knows to search for the last remaining member of the gang in John Marston, because they know John is the one that killed Micah, and so John will be the one to kill Bill, Javier, and Dutch. And so, in a way, by John killing Micah, he sealed his own fate. You can even see the mirroring in the way that when he kills Micah, Micah falls down dead in a very similar way to what John did in the original Red Dead Redemption. Again, mirroring by John killing Micah, he's essentially killing himself. On top of these links, there's also many callbacks to Red Dead Redemption 1. To name a few, we have the scene in which Arthur takes Jack fishing. We get a nice snarky remark from Edgar Ross telling Jack to enjoy his fishing trip. Anyone that's played the first game's epilogue will know Jack proceeded to track down and kill Edgar Ross while he was on none other than a fishing trip, making that line all the more satisfying when you hear him say it, knowing Jack will finish him off when the time comes. Another moment is just after Dutch drowns Angelo Bronte. John isn't happy with the way he dealt with him, and Dutch responds by saying, "The way I see it, it was either him or me, and I figured it might as well be him." This is the same line that John says to Javier Escuela when confronting him in the original Red Dead Redemption. Another key moment is when Dutch and Arthur are backed onto the edge of a cliff, and Dutch gives the speech about not being able to fight nature before jumping to the water below, which is directly the same as when Dutch gives the same speech to John before jumping to his death at the end of Red Dead Redemption 1. And there are so many more of these moments, but one of my favorites has to be when John tracks down Micah and reaches the top of the mountain. This is then followed by the iconic theme music from Red Dead Redemption playing as you make your way towards Micah.
Well, I got something to take. That was Joe.
This final mission is truly incredible and fully establishes John Marston as the protagonist and his story being the central focus. Rockstar completely understands the story they were telling, and they fucking nailed it. To conclude this big long video, Rockstar have nailed every aspect of telling a great story, but also telling a prequel story. They combine the two so well and fully complete the story arc of John Marston, whilst also managing to tell the story of Arthur Morgan, Dutch van der Linde, and the whole gang. This narrative is not just the best prequel, but is the best narrative that I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. And I want to say thank you. Thank you so much to the narrative team at Rockstar Games. You've made me beyond happy with how you've handled this, and I appreciate it more than you can know. Go and take a well-earned vacation because you deserve that shit. Thank you so much to everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Did I